On a fog-laced October morning in rural Montana, Leila Torres drove through the silent hills, her old Ford pickup rattling with every bump on the gravel road. The sky was the color of steel wool, and mist rolled over the fence posts, blurring the horizon until the world seemed to end in gray uncertainty. She pulled up to the gate of her late uncle's ranch, engine idling, heart pounding in her chest. The place looked even more rundown than she remembered. Paint peeled from the sagging porch, the windows were smudged, and weeds clawed up through cracks in the driveway. For a moment, Leila sat frozen, clutching the steering wheel with hands that still bore the calluses and tiny scars of her years in the army. The wind whispered across the fields, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. She was supposed to be here to settle the paperwork, list the property, and move on. Just a quick transaction. Get in, get out. That was the plan. But as she stepped out, boots sinking into the mud, something felt off. The silence wasn't just rural quiet. It was loaded, expectant, as if the whole ranch was holding its breath. She unlocked the front door. The air inside was stale, tinged with the ghosts of old leather and forgotten hopes. A pile of unopened mail sat on the kitchen table. There was a note in her uncle's unmistakable block letters, taped to the fridge. Leila, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something unfinished here. Please, don't ignore it. She frowned, tucking the note into her jacket pocket, its words prickling the back of her neck. Something unfinished? Her uncle had always been a little mysterious, a man of secrets and sideways glances, but in death his riddles seemed heavier. She wandered the house, the wood floor creaking under her weight. Family photos hung askew on the hallway walls, her uncle in his prime, grinning atop a broad-shouldered horse. Leila herself, maybe 10 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, arms flung around her uncle's waist. The afternoon wore on, gray light slanting through grime-caked windows. Leila worked her way outside, inspecting the outbuildings. The barn roof sagged, as if tired from too many winters. Tools rusted in the grass. It wasn't until dusk settled in, thick and chill, that she noticed it. A heavy padlock on the stable at the far end of the property. Newer than the rest, gleaming coldly in the dying light. She jiggled the lock, but it didn't budge. Scratched into the wood, just above the latch, was a single word. Danger. As she stood there, an uneasy feeling crept up her spine. From across the field, the neighbor's old dog began to bark. Long, low, and urgent. Leila's mind wandered back to the stories she'd heard as a kid, whispered among the locals about a cursed horse. She remembered her uncle's voice, grave and quiet, warning her to stay away from the far stable, to never disturb what lived there. Later that evening, as she made coffee on the battered stove, there was a sharp knock at the back door. She opened it to find a ranch hand. Tommy, she remembered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Evening, Leila. Sorry for your loss. You here to sell? Tommy's voice was rough, but not unkind. Then that's the plan, she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. But I found something. The locked stable. What's in there? He glanced away, chewing his lip. You don't want to mess with that horse. Folks say he's bad luck. Your uncle? He kept him locked up for a reason. Leila bristled. Just a horse, Tommy. How bad could it be? He looked at her, eyes haunted. Some animals ain't right, Leila. That one? He saw something. Ain't been the same since. She closed the door, shivering. The coffee tasted bitter on her tongue. That night, sleep was slow to come. The wind howled outside, shaking loose a shutter. Shadows crawled across the ceiling. She dreamed of hoofbeats thundering through fog, a horse's scream echoing in the dark. When she woke, sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. At dawn, Leila stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting through her sweater. Across the yard, a few neighbors had gathered by the fence, whispering, casting wary glances at the locked stable. One of them, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, caught her eye. Frank Whitmore. She remembered him from childhood as her uncle's friend, but now his gaze was cold, appraising. "You'd do best to leave that horse be," Frank called out, voice carrying across the distance. "Some things are better left alone." Leila ignored him, stubbornness taking root. She made her way to the stable, studying the lock. This time, she noticed a faint, fresh scratch, like someone had tried to force it open. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the ranch, a strange energy buzzing in her veins. The place felt alive, charged with secrets. Every time she passed the locked stable, she heard a muffled thumping from inside, a heavy presence moving restlessly behind the walls. That evening, as the sun bled red into the western sky, Leila sat on the porch with her uncle's old note in her lap. Something unfinished. The words looped through her mind. She looked at the ranch, a place haunted by stories, by tragedy, by the heavy loneliness that comes from being both watched and utterly alone. The wind picked up, sending a cold shiver through her bones. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, deep, raw, and mournful. The sound lingered in the air, promising trouble, promising answers. Leila stared at the horizon, determination hardening in her chest. Whatever secrets the ranch held, she wasn't going anywhere until she uncovered the truth. Leila woke to a pale sunrise, filtering through dusty curtains. The world outside washed gold and blue. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. But then, the ache in her shoulders and the faint trace of anxiety in her gut reminded her. She was back at the ranch, surrounded by unfamiliar silence and the weight of unfinished family business. Determined to confront whatever haunted the locked stable, Leila dressed quickly, pulling on her old army jacket and boots. The morning was brisk, every breath painting clouds in the air. She felt the eyes of the town, neighbors peeking from behind curtains, ranch hands pausing their chores to watch her cross the yard. The padlock on the stable door was stubborn, but a decade in the military had taught Leila a thing or two about persistence. She pried at it with a rusty crowbar she found in the shed, muttering under her breath until finally, with a harsh metallic snap, the lock gave way. The sound echoed across the empty field. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay, sweat, and something darker. Fear, maybe. Or memories soaked into the wood. Sunlight spilled in, catching dust motes that danced in lazy circles. As her eyes adjusted, Leila saw him. A massive black stallion, muscles coiled beneath a battered hide, hooves caked in dried mud, his coat mottled with patches of dirt and scars. The horse's eyes were the first thing that struck her. Enormous. Wild. Ringed with white. There was pain in them. And rage. But something else, too. A haunted intelligence that seemed almost human. A jagged, lightning-shaped streak of white cut down his forehead, stark against the inky blackness of his face. Thunderbolt, she realized. That was the name locals had whispered as children, like a spell or a warning. As soon as Thunderbolt caught sight of her, he erupted. He reared and slammed his massive body against the stall door, iron shoes screeching on the concrete. His nostrils flared, and he snorted like a creature twice his size, the whites of his eyes flashing. For a split second, Leila's body froze, instinct and old combat training tangling in her veins. But she didn't back away. She steadied her breathing, holding his gaze. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." The stallion snorted again, muscles trembling, mane wild and tangled as seaweed. Each time she took a careful step closer, he tossed his head, ears pinned, breath coming fast. But Leila noticed something odd. There was no aggression for the sake of violence. It was fear, deep and raw, leaking out with every twitch and stomp. Thunderbolt was a prisoner, not just of this stall, but of whatever nightmare played out in his memory. From the shadows of the barn, two ranch hands watched, arms folded, faces drawn tight. One of them, a wiry guy named Vince, spoke up, voice low and urgent. "You shouldn't be in there, ma'am. That horse, he's trouble. Your uncle should have put him down a long time ago." Leila bristled. "He's not trouble. He's scared." Vince shook his head, spitting into the hay. Doesn't matter. That animal's dangerous. He's already hurt 2 people. We keep him locked up for everyone's safety. Best not get too close." But Leila saw it differently. As Thunderbolt's breathing slowed, she felt something stir in her chest, a thread of kinship she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way his muscles tensed at every sudden movement, or the flicker of panic that never quite left his eyes. It was like looking in a mirror. She'd been there herself, back in the army, back when the world went sideways and every sound was a threat. She squatted by the stall, hands visible, keeping her movements slow. Thunderbolt pressed himself against the far wall, sides heaving. For a long moment, horse and woman simply stared at each other. Two veterans, both carrying wounds too deep to show. Leila lingered, speaking softly, letting her presence fill the barn without pressure. "It's all right," she murmured. "I'm staying. You're not alone." Suddenly, the barn door banged open, making both Leila and Thunderbolt flinch. Frank Whitmore stepped inside, boots crunching on straw, face etched in a permanent scowl. Leila, you need to let the men handle this. Your uncle made his peace with that beast. Let it go." But Leila stood her ground. "I'm not putting down a horse just because people are scared of him." Frank's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. That horse, he saw something that changed him. There's a reason your uncle kept him locked up." Leila's frustration simmered, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Well, now he's mine, and I'm not giving up on him." Frank left, muttering under his breath. The ranch hands exchanged glances and followed. The barn fell quiet, only the sound of Thunderbolt's ragged breathing and the distant caw of crows outside. Leila took stock of the stall. Sparse bedding, an empty water bucket, old feed left untouched. She moved slowly, refilling water and setting down fresh hay, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Thunderbolt watched her every move, never once relaxing, but neither did he lash out. After finishing her chores, Leila sat on an overturned feed bucket just outside the stall, letting silence fill the space between them. She closed her eyes, listening to the world, the creak of wood, the flutter of a barn swallow, the hesitant snort of a wounded animal. In that quiet, something fragile and electric passed between them. And night crept in. The ranch hands had left, but Leila remained, determined not to let fear dictate her next move. She thought of her uncle's letter, until the unfinished business, and the whispered rumors that swirled around this place, like autumn leaves. When she finally left the stable, locking the door behind her, Thunderbolt stood in the darkness, his lightning bolt blaze gleaming faintly in the half-light. For the first time since she arrived, Leila felt a flicker of hope. Maybe for Thunderbolt, maybe for herself. In the moonlit quiet, she made a silent promise. Whatever this horse had been through, whatever secrets this ranch held, she wouldn't walk away. The Montana sky was a moody patchwork of low clouds and piercing blue as Leila moved through her uncle's ranch the next morning. She hadn't slept well. The echo of Thunderbolt's haunted eyes lingered in her mind, mixing with the restless images that had plagued her since her return from Afghanistan. The house creaked and settled, each sound a reminder that she was alone out here, with only ghosts and memories for company. Leila sipped her coffee at the kitchen table, staring at the note from her uncle. Something unfinished. The words gnawed at her, as persistent as the cold seeping through the thin window glass. She almost envied the way rural folks could close their doors on the past. For her, the past was a shadow that followed her everywhere. She set out across the yard, boots crunching in the frost. The stable loomed ahead, still shrouded in a fog of superstition and warning. As she reached for the latch, a sudden bang, sharp, metallic, rang out from the nearby tool shed. Leila's body reacted instantly, her muscles locked, heart jackhammering in her chest. The mug dropped from her hand and shattered on the ground, sending coffee splattering across her boots. The world blurred at the edges. She was back in Kandahar, the smell of burning tires and the wail of sirens filling her senses. Her breath grew shallow. She dropped to her knees, hands covering her ears, as a wave of panic pressed in. Not now, not here, she thought, fighting to regain control. She squeezed her eyes shut and counted. 1, 2, 3. The cold air helped, grounding her, reminding her she was on her uncle's ranch, not in the crosshairs of a distant war. When the panic receded, she realized Thunderbolt was thrashing in his stall, the heavy wood shuddering with every kick. His terror was as raw as her own. He reared and pounded his hooves, eyes rolling white, nostrils flaring. For a moment their traumas overlapped in the air between them, two souls chained by different battles. Leila pulled herself up, legs trembling. She moved slowly, talking softly, trying to calm them both. "Easy, boy. It's okay. You're safe," she said, more for herself than for Thunderbolt. The stallion eventually stopped, panting, his flanks heaving from the effort. Leila pressed her forehead to the cool wood of the stall, closing her eyes. She understood now. Thunderbolt wasn't just broken by cruelty or neglect. He was a survivor, rattled by something no one else had seen or believed. They were both veterans, each carrying scars the world couldn't see. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Leila found herself drawn to the barn again and again, compelled by a stubborn sense of responsibility. She cleaned the water trough and mucked out the stall, her movements methodical. Yet whenever she paused, Thunderbolt would watch her warily, his ears flicking, but he didn't lash out. Late that afternoon, Frank Whitmore stopped by, leaning on the fence with a scowl. "You look rough," he called out, not unkindly. "You sure you want to keep at this?" Leila wiped sweat from her brow. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "The horse needs help." Frank shifted, uneasy. "It's not just the horse, Leila. People around here, they talk. That stable's been bad luck since before your uncle locked it up. Some say the horse is cursed. Others say he saw something that changed him." She looked Frank in the eye. "I'm not scared of stories or hard work." He shrugged, but there was something in his gaze. Guilt, maybe, or a warning he was too proud to voice. He turned and walked away, leaving Leila alone in the lengthening shadows. That night, another storm rolled in. The wind rattled the windows, branches scraping the roof like fingernails. Leila lay in bed, eyes wide, listening for every creak and sigh of the old house. She tried to journal, something she hadn't done since deployment, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind spun circles around the locked stable, her uncle's mysterious note, and the way Thunderbolt had mirrored her own fear. Somewhere after midnight, she heard a crash from the barn. A heavy thump, followed by frantic snorting. Leila threw on her boots and ran outside, the cold biting at her skin. Inside, Thunderbolt was tangled in his halter, eyes wide with panic. It had been another loud sound, probably the wind slamming a door. She moved fast, hands steady despite the adrenaline, and released him from the tangle. For a moment, they stood in the semi-darkness, breathing hard together. Leila stroked his neck, her touch feather-light. Thunderbolt trembled, but didn't flinch away. She whispered, "I get it. You know, some things you never forget." Her voice was barely more than breath, but it seemed to calm the horse. By morning, Leila made her decision. She wouldn't sell the ranch, at least not yet. She needed to see this through. For Thunderbolt, for her uncle, for herself. Maybe the land was more than just a burden. Maybe it was the key to her own healing, if she could find the courage to stay. She called her realtor that afternoon, her voice firm. "I'm not ready to list the property. I need some time." There was a long pause. "You sure about that, Miss Torres? Market's good right now." "I'm sure," Leila replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone. After she hung up, she spent the rest of the day working on repairs, fixing broken boards, replacing rotted rails, and tending to Thunderbolt. She brought him fresh water and spent hours just sitting nearby, humming an old lullaby she remembered from childhood. The work was hard, and her muscles ached, but each task made the ranch feel a little less haunted. That evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, Leila found herself standing in the yard watching Thunderbolt graze in the paddock. For the first time, he didn't bolt to the far side when she approached. Instead, he lifted his head, ears pricked, and watched her with something like curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, they could help each other. heal. Inside, Leila sat down at the kitchen table and opened her journal again. Her hand shook as she wrote the date, but the words came easier this time. Today, I decided to stay, not because I'm strong, but because I'm tired of running. She glanced out the window at Thunderbolt, standing proud and scarred in the evening light. Whatever secrets the ranch held, she would face them, one day at a time. Leila quickly learned that healing a wounded horse, and perhaps healing herself, was not a task for the impatient. The days slipped by in a steady rhythm, each one testing her resolve. But slowly, like the steady thaw of Montana frost, change began to creep in at the edges. Every morning, Leila made her way to the barn with a quiet, deliberate calm. She brought Thunderbolt fresh water and a small scoop of grain, never rushing or forcing the interaction. At first, the stallion would retreat to the farthest corner of his stall, body coiled and tense, eyes wide with suspicion. He would watch her every move, nostrils flaring, never letting down his guard. But Leila knew about being cornered by fear. She moved slowly, hands always visible, humming a low tune her mother used to sing when she was small. Sometimes, just for a moment, the melody seemed to settle both of them. On the third day, a breakthrough. She entered the barn as dawn spilled pink and gold across the sky, arms loaded with hay. Thunderbolt eyed her warily but didn't retreat. Instead, he snorted softly, then stretched his neck to sniff the fresh hay she offered. Leila froze, heart pounding, and allowed him to investigate her hand. For the briefest second, the stallion's velvet muzzle brushed her palm, so quick she might have imagined it, but real enough to leave her trembling with hope. "Good boy," she murmured, voice steady despite her racing heart. "See, I'm not your enemy." Each day after, Leila built on that small success. She would spend hours just sitting on an overturned bucket beside the stall, reading out loud from whatever book she'd pulled off the old shelf, sometimes just jotting notes in her journal. Occasionally she'd brush the horse, slow and careful, letting him get used to the feel of her hands. She whispered old lullabies and sometimes secrets too heavy to tell anyone else. With each session, Thunderbolt grew a little less wary, though he never fully relaxed. But trust was not a straight path. There were setbacks. One morning, a passing truck backfired on the road, and the noise sent Thunderbolt into a frenzy, rearing, kicking at the stall door until sweat darkened his coat, and he bled from a shallow cut on his leg. Leila stayed close, soothing him with gentle words, fighting her own flashbacks as adrenaline pulsed through her veins. When the storm of panic finally passed, she tended to his wound, her hands steady even as her insides trembled. That afternoon, as Leila swept the barn aisle, the heavy silence was broken by footsteps crunching on gravel. Frank Whitmore appeared in the doorway, arms folded, a sour look on his face. Behind him, a couple of other neighbors lingered, their eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're wasting your time, Leila," Frank called out, his tone carrying an edge of something personal. "That horse is a menace. Your uncle nearly lost everything because of him. I still don't get why you're bothering." Leila set her broom aside, meeting Frank's gaze with a stubbornness she hadn't felt in months. "I don't believe in lost causes," she replied, voice calm but unyielding. "And I don't believe in putting down an animal just because he's scared." Frank spat in the dirt, shaking his head. "You weren't here. You don't know what he did. If you're smart, you'll stop trying to fix what's already broken." One of the neighbors, a woman named Lorraine, spoke up, a little softer. "We're just worried about you, Leila. It's not just the horse. This place has a way of chewing people up." Leila forced a smile, grateful for the concern, but determined to stand her ground. "I appreciate it. Really, but I'm not leaving." Frank narrowed his eyes. "Suit yourself. But if something happens, don't say we didn't warn you." As they left, Leila felt the weight of their words linger in the barn, mingling with dust and suspicion, but she refused to let it get to her. Instead, she turned her attention to Thunderbolt, who had watched the entire exchange in silence, as if he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. That evening, after the chores were done, Leila returned to the kitchen and pulled out her old leather-bound journal. She hadn't written anything real in it since deployment. For a long moment she stared at the blank page, pen poised and trembling fingers. The memories were raw, and her mind kept circling back to Afghanistan, to the friends she'd lost, to the dreams that left her waking in cold sweats. But now, for the first time in ages, she let herself write. The words came slow at first, then faster, as if a dam had broken. I see myself in him, the way he flinches at sudden noise, and the way he won't let anyone get close. He's survived something nobody understands. We both have. She paused, tapping the pen against her lips, then added, maybe healing isn't about going back to the way things were. Maybe it's about finding a new way to be okay. With that, she closed the journal, feeling a strange sense of relief. Out in the yard, Thunderbolt whinnied, the sound low and almost content. A week passed. Each day brought small victories and setbacks, a nudge of Thunderbolt's nose, a moment of calm when a loud sound didn't send him into a panic. The first time he allowed her to brush his tangled mane for more than a few seconds. Leila grew bolder, whispering to him stories from her own life, letting her voice fill the barn. But with every step forward, the shadow of her uncle's warning lingered. She kept thinking about the cryptic note and the unfinished business. And always, there was the question in Frank's eyes, and the whispered rumors drifting through town. One crisp morning, as she brought Thunderbolt a bucket of water, the stallion did something remarkable. He stretched his head over the stall door, and for the first time, nudged her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. Leila smiled through sudden tears. "Good boy, Thunderbolt," she whispered, her voice thick. "We're going to get through this. I promise." But as she turned to leave, she noticed Frank standing at the edge of the property, watching in silence, his face carved with secrets and regret. And for the first time, Leila realized, earning Thunderbolt's trust was only the beginning. Whatever her uncle had left unfinished, whatever danger still lingered on this land, she would have to face it, and soon. The first true snow of the season drifted in on a cold morning, frosting the paddocks and roof lines with shimmering white. Leila woke to the soft hush of flakes against the window, and a sense that something in the air had changed. She felt stronger than she had in months, the small routines she and Thunderbolt shared becoming a kind of therapy. But beneath the comfort was a stubborn itch, the feeling of unfinished business growing more insistent with every day. Thunderbolt's trust was no longer a fragile thing. He met her at the stall door now, ears pricked, ready for their morning rituals. Leila brushed his coat, untangling knots and humming to him, the barn filling with her voice and the gentle sounds of a horse finally willing to let down his guard. Each day, their progress built on itself, as if the ranch itself were slowly shaking off its haunted reputation. One afternoon, while repairing a broken hinge in the tack room, Leila's gaze drifted upward. The ceiling panels were warped and water-stained, sagging in one corner above an old wooden ladder that led to the storage loft. She hesitated. Her uncle had warned her about poking around in the past, but she felt drawn to the shadowed space above. Curiosity, or maybe intuition, nudged her forward. The ladder creaked with every step as she climbed into the dust-laden loft. The light from below barely reached the corners, leaving much of the place in gloom. Old saddles and feed bags, coils of weathered rope, and boxes filled with yellowed ledgers lined the floor. She ran her hand along the beams, stirring up the scent of cedar, mold, and long-ago summers. In the far corner, covered by a horse blanket stiff with age, she found her uncle's custom saddle. The leather was scuffed and worn, but beautifully tooled, her uncle's initials stamped on the stirrup leathers. She smiled, remembering how he'd ride out before dawn, returning at sunset with stories and the smell of sweat and sagebrush on his clothes. Instinct told her to check the saddle more closely. She ran her fingers over the seams, pressing and poking at the thick layers of padding. One edge felt wrong, softer, almost hollow. Carefully, Leila worked her pocket knife along the stitching. The thread came loose easily, revealing a small plastic bag tucked deep inside the saddle seat. Her heart pounded as she withdrew a micro SD card taped to a folded slip of paper labeled in her uncle's unmistakable handwriting. Don't trust him. The message sent a shiver up her spine. She stared at the card, thoughts racing. Who couldn't be trusted? What did her uncle discover before he died? She pocketed the card and hurried down the ladder, mind spinning with possibilities. Back in the house, Leila dug out her old laptop, fingers trembling as she inserted the SD card. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared. Proof. She opened it to find dozens of photos and short videos, each one more unsettling than the last. There was Thunderbolt, younger and healthier, standing with an unfamiliar man by the paddock fence. The man was tall, with a square jaw and a politician's smile. Someone Leila vaguely recognized from town, though she couldn't place him at first. In the background of one photo stood the mayor, talking animatedly, shaking hands, money passing between them. Other images showed trailers at night, frightened horses being loaded in secret. There were grainy shots of documents, property deeds, shipping manifests, what looked like veterinary certificates falsified with the town's seal. Leila's blood ran cold as she realized what her uncle had been onto: land theft, illegal animal transport, and, her breath caught, a file labeled accident, with photos of a man's bloodied shirt and a burned-out truck near the river bend. The phone rang, jolting her out of her trance. She stared at the screen. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, suddenly anxious. This was bigger than she'd imagined, and now she held proof that could destroy powerful people in town. She needed help, but who could she trust? That night, unable to sleep, Leila wandered the property under a thin moon. She stopped at Thunderbolt's paddock, the stallion lifting his head at her approach. As if sensing her distress, she rubbed his forehead, her voice thick with worry. "What did you see? Old friend? What did they do to you?" Thunderbolt pressed his muzzle into her hand, as if to reassure her. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, their shared pain and unspoken fears hanging in the crisp air. In the days that followed, Leila grew hyper-aware of every odd sound and passing car. As she changed her laptop password, copied the contents of the SD card, and hid it in 3 different places: her uncle's hollowed-out Bible, a jar of nails in the garage, and the bottom of the old flour bin in the pantry. She'd learned in the army to trust her instincts, and they were screaming at her now. Frank Whitmore stopped by again, lingering near the fence with a cup of coffee and a forced casualness. "You find anything interesting up in that loft, Leila?" he asked, the tone light, but his eyes searching. She kept her face neutral, hiding the pounding of her heart. "Just some old saddles and junk? Why?" Frank shrugged, glancing out at the fields. "Place like this keeps its secrets, that's all." "Sometimes best to let 'em lie." Leila forced a smile. "Thanks for the advice, Frank. I'll keep it in mind." When he left, she watched his truck disappear down the lane, unease settling like a stone in her stomach. Her uncle had been trying to expose something, and now that burden had fallen to her. The truth about Thunderbolt, about the mayor, about everything that had happened on this land. Later, in the dim quiet of the barn, she whispered her fears to Thunderbolt, who stood quietly, his breath a steady comfort in the shadows. "I don't know what's coming," she told him, "but I promise, I won't let them hurt you again." Thunderbolt snorted, the sound more defiant than afraid. For the first time, Leila felt less like a victim of the ranch's secrets and more like its protector. Up in her room, she opened her journal again and wrote, "It's not just about healing anymore. It's about justice. For Thunderbolt, for Uncle Sam, for everyone they try to break." And as the snow fell outside, blanketing the ranch in white silence, Leila knew the real storm was only just beginning. The first thing Leila noticed the next morning was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the brittle hush that settles before a storm. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with images from the SD card, the mayor's smug handshake, frightened horses shunted into darkness, her uncle's desperate handwriting. Don't trust him? Each new revelation felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She pulled on her boots and headed for the kitchen. Her phone vibrated, flashing with an alert. Password incorrect. Multiple failed login attempts. Leila froze, the mug of coffee halfway to her lips. Someone was trying to break into her phone, her only link to the outside world, and the device holding backups of her uncle's evidence. A knock at the door startled her so badly she nearly spilled her coffee. She peered through the window. No one. On the porch, a brick sat neatly on the doormat, a sheet of paper folded beneath it. Her hands shook as she picked it up and read the words scrawled in angry red marker. "Leave it alone or you'll be next." Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Leila scanned the yard, at every shadow suddenly suspect. She ran to the barn, heart thundering, half expecting to find Thunderbolt hurt or missing. But the stallion stood calmly in his paddock, watching her approach with alert eyes. Leila leaned against the fence, grounding herself in the steady sound of his breathing. She knew she couldn't handle this alone anymore. After a moment's hesitation, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she'd always associated with trouble and hope, Casey Brennan. A fellow Army vet, Casey was now a reporter for a regional paper, specializing in stories others were too scared to chase. If anyone could help, it was her. Leila typed a message, fingers flying. "Casey, I need you. Not a joke. There's something big here. Ranch, mayor, horses. Please," Casey replied within minutes. "I'm on my way. Sit tight. Don't talk to anyone else." Leila spent the rest of the day checking locks, covering windows, and making sure the SD card copies were hidden well. Each time she passed a mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself. Jaw clenched, eyes rimmed with worry. It was the same look she'd worn during the worst days overseas. She was back in a war zone, but this time the enemy wore friendly faces. In the late afternoon, she headed to the barn to calm her nerves. The weather was turning, storm clouds building over the mountains. Thunderbolt was restless, pacing along the fence line. As Leila filled his water trough, she heard a sharp, dry rattling. She turned just in time to see a rattlesnake coiled in the corner, its body tensed and ready to strike. Leila's muscles froze, instincts kicking in. The snake's tongue flicked, testing the air, inching closer. But before she could react, Thunderbolt reared back, then lunged forward with a force that startled her. The massive stallion brought his hooves down just inches from the rattler, sending it fleeing into the weeds. Leila exhaled, realizing just how close she'd come. She stood in awe, shaken and grateful. Thunderbolt stood over her, head high and snorting, the defiance in his posture unmistakable. He had protected her, not out of training, but out of some deeper, wordless bond. "Thank you," Leila whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out and stroked his neck, feeling the heat and strength beneath his skin. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. Not truly. Thunderbolt wasn't just a survivor. He was a protector, too. As the sky darkened, Casey arrived in a battered Jeep, skidding to a stop outside the house. She stepped out, tall and wiry, hair tied back, eyes sharp and unblinking. "Leila Torres, you have a habit of finding trouble," Casey said, her smile quick and fierce. Leila managed a tired grin. "Nice to see you, too. I wish it were under better circumstances." They went inside, Leila pouring coffee while Casey took notes, her voice low and urgent. Leila showed her the SD card, the photos, the threatening note, blotted. Casey's expression grew grimmer with each new piece of evidence. "You realize what you have here, right?" Casey murmured. "This could take down half the town, maybe more." Leila nodded. "That's why they're coming after me." Casey leaned forward. "We need to make copies. Get this out to people we trust. Real authorities, not the local sheriff. You can't sleep here tonight. Pack a bag. I'll stay with you until we figure out our next move." As they spoke, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house. Leila's nerves stretched tight. She loaded the SD card files onto a secure cloud server, then hid the original copies in separate places. Casey called a federal contact, relaying a brief summary and arranging a meeting. In the barn, Thunderbolt shifted restlessly. Leila visited him before nightfall, the storm breaking overhead in a sudden torrent. She stroked his nose, whispering, "We're in this together. I promise I'll keep you safe." Suddenly, headlights swept across the property. A pickup idled at the gate, someone watching from inside. Leila's pulse pounded in her ears. She and Casey killed the lights in the house, peering out from behind the curtains. The truck eventually drove off, but the message was clear. They were being watched. As thunder rolled over the valley, Leila's mind raced. She was scared, but for the first time, she wasn't running. She had allies, Casey, and the horse who'd saved her life. She stared out at the wild Montana night and let the storm wash away her doubts. Later, as the rain hammered the roof, Leila wrote in her journal, "I used to think coming home would bring me peace. But peace is something you build, not something you find. You build it one act of courage at a time. Sometimes, you even build it with the help of a horse." In the darkness, she slept at last, Thunderbolt's steady breathing drifting through her dreams. But danger hadn't left. It had only begun to reveal itself. The storm's rage left a fresh, raw silence over the ranch the next morning. Leila barely slept. Every time her eyes closed, she replayed the image of that pickup idling at the edge of her property, headlights glaring, watching and waiting. Casey was already up, hunched over her laptop in the kitchen, speaking in a hushed tone to a contact at the federal office. Thunderbolt seemed uneasy, his energy sharp and restless. Leila checked the locks twice, then 3 times, every shadow in the barn setting her nerves on edge. She and Casey double-checked every hiding place for the SD cards, each time reminded just how fragile their safety was. Outside, the sky was a flat, bruised gray, the air heavy with the promise of more trouble. By late afternoon, the wind shifted, and with it came a sickly, acrid smell, a warning Leila recognized before she even registered the danger. Smoke. Somewhere nearby, something was burning. Casey was the first to see the orange flicker near the barn's far end. "Leila, the barn!" she shouted, vaulting off the porch. Leila's heart leapt into her throat as she sprinted across the yard, her boots slipping in wet grass. Flames leapt along the weathered wood, licking at the rafters. The dry timbers ignited fast, feeding the inferno. Inside, the shrill, terrified screams of horses echoed against the flames. Thunderbolt reared and kicked at his stall, wild-eyed, the other animals panicking in a stampede of fear. Heat pressed against Leila's face as she grabbed the bolt cutters hanging by the barn door. "Stay back," Casey yelled, shoving a wet towel at Leila. "I'll call 911. Get the animals." Leila charged inside, smoke stinging her eyes, the world turning surreal. Shouts, the roar of the fire, splinters of orange and black swirling through the air. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself forward. She cut Thunderbolt's lock first. The stallion burst out, wild but unhurt, sides heaving. She grabbed his mane and shouted above the chaos, "Go! Run!" Thunderbolt hesitated for a fraction of a second, then galloped through the open barn doors into the smoky twilight. Leila rushed down the aisle, opening stalls, calling to the panicked horses. She managed to free 2 more before the roof groaned, embers showering down. A burning beam crashed to the ground, blocking her exit. She staggered back, smoke blinding her. In that dizzying moment, she thought of her uncle, his warnings, his secrets, the unfinished story. She wondered if he'd faced his end in fear or in defiance. Leila squared her shoulders and made for the side door, barely visible through the black haze. As she stumbled outside, coughing and gasping, Thunderbolt was there, circling anxiously, snorting and stomping the ground as if urging her to hurry. Leila made a last-ditch dash across the yard, the barn behind her collapsing in a shower of sparks and ash. The fire department arrived in a whirl of red lights and shouts, men and women rushing to douse the flames. Leila leaned on the paddock fence, body shaking, watching the barn burn down to its bones. Thunderbolt pressed his head into her shoulder, and she gripped his mane, refusing to let go. Casey joined her, face streaked with soot. "You're insane," she whispered, eyes shining with tears. "But you did it. You saved them." Leila nodded numbly, unable to speak. As the fire burned itself out, the sheriff arrived, Deputy Matthews, a young man with a tidy uniform and the kind of gaze that missed nothing. He picked his way through the ruined barn, taking notes, glancing at Leila and Casey, as if he already knew the answers to questions he hadn't asked. He spoke with Casey first, then turned to Leila. "Looks like an electrical fire," he said, his tone almost bored. "We'll get someone out to confirm, but these old barns go up fast." Leila saw the way his eyes darted, the way he ignored the charred brick tossed near the scene, the way he avoided meeting her gaze. Her uncle's warning echoed in her mind. She forced herself to stay calm, biting back the urge to accuse him right there. "Is everyone all right?" the sheriff asked, voice clipped. Leila nodded, feeling her rage simmering just below the surface. Everyone except the barn," Matthews shrugged. "Insurance'll help you rebuild." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "But you be careful, Miss Torres. Accidents happen out here." Leila watched him drive away, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She turned to Casey. "He knows he's in on it. The mayor, the horses, all of it." Casey's jaw tightened. "I'll push the story. I'll go to my editor and the feds directly. But you need to stay somewhere else tonight. He'll come back. They all will." The night was restless and long. Leila made up a makeshift camp in the pasture, refusing to leave Thunderbolt's side. She watched the stars wheel overhead, the air thick with the smell of burned wood and betrayal. Thunderbolt lay down nearby, a silent sentinel, as she found herself thinking back to a moment in Afghanistan. An ambush, a burning vehicle, her own body trembling as she carried a wounded friend to safety. The terror, the chaos, the defiant will to survive. The ranch, she realized, was another battlefield. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for justice, for her uncle's memory, for Thunderbolt. At dawn, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruin and blackened bones poking through the gray ash. Leila walked the perimeter, searching for anything salvageable. She found the melted remains of a bridle, a scorched halter, a horseshoe twisted by heat. She let herself cry, silent tears tracing lines through the soot on her face. When Casey returned with coffee and news from her contacts, she found Leila standing tall, one hand resting on Thunderbolt's neck. "The feds want to talk to you," Casey said. "They've seen the evidence. They're coming. You did it, Leila. You forced it into the open." Leila nodded, hope flickering in her chest. "We're not done yet. Not until everyone knows the truth." Thunderbolt nuzzled her gently, and for the first time, Leila felt that maybe, just maybe, she could win this fight. By mid-morning, Leila knew staying on the ranch was no longer safe. The barn was a blackened skeleton, her nerves frayed from sleepless nights and the ever-present threat of shadowy figures watching from the road. Casey packed her Jeep with the essentials: files, electronics, water, non-perishables, and checked the charge on her phone for the 100th time. Leila gathered what little she could, her eyes lingering on the ruins of the barn, the only home Thunderbolt had ever known. The air was sharp with the tang of pine and ash as Leila saddled Thunderbolt. For the first time since her arrival, she climbed onto his back. Not just to train or to coax him into trust, but to escape. She expected resistance, a wild refusal from the stallion whose life had been nothing but fear and confinement. But Thunderbolt stood steady beneath her, every muscle taut but responsive, as if he understood that this was more than a ride. It was a leap into the unknown together. Casey drove ahead, her Jeep navigating the rutted mountain road with practiced skill. Leila and Thunderbolt followed the old service trail that wound through the timberland behind the ranch, a path her uncle had told her about in childhood, once used for army training exercises, now overgrown and rarely traveled. The cold air burned Leila's lungs and sharpened her senses. She was aware of every sound: the clatter of Thunderbolt's hooves over stone, the scurrying of small animals in the underbrush, the distant echo of sirens back in town. They climbed for hours, switchbacks winding higher into the hills, the forest closing around them. Sunlight dappled through the pines, and the world shrank to just the steady rhythm of her breathing and Thunderbolt's movement beneath her. The horse's confidence grew with every step, his head held higher, his gait smoother. Leila realized she'd been holding her breath for days, maybe years, and now she let it go, each exhale drawing some of the weight off her shoulders. By early afternoon, they reached a small, weathered cabin nestled in a clearing, once a military outpost. now half swallowed by wild roses and grass. Casey was already there, and checking the perimeter, her nerves tight as bowstrings. She greeted Leila with a weary hug, then ducked inside to set up her laptop, phone, and battery packs. Leila led Thunderbolt to the stream behind the cabin, letting him drink deeply, his coat steaming in the chill air. Inside, the cabin was cold and musty, but sturdy. Leila's uncle had used it for years as a retreat, a place to hunt and think. She found shelves lined with old notebooks, the covers frayed, but the writing inside sharp and clear. As she flipped through them, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sense that her uncle's spirit was present, guiding her with every turn of the page. Casey cooked up a quick meal of canned stew, the two women eating in companionable silence. The windows rattled in the rising wind. After dinner, Leila sat cross-legged on the floor, poring over her uncle's notebooks. Pages and pages of names, dates, sketches of the property, coded references to the mayor, the shipments, and nighttime visitors. One page was marked with a deep crease and a dried flower, as if her uncle had needed to hold on to a memory of hope amid the darkness. Leila read aloud, her voice trembling. "If anything happens to me, trust the horse. Thunderbolt saw it all. Follow the trail, not just the money. The truth is in the hands that carry the pain." She closed the notebook, heart racing. He was building a case, Casey, for years. He knew something would happen, but he never quit. He even trusted Thunderbolt more than anyone else. Casey nodded, her face grave. "We'll bring it all. Every last piece of this. The feds are on their way. You just have to stay safe until then." Night came early in the mountains, the sky turning to indigo, the forest swallowing every sound. Leila and Casey took turns keeping watch. But exhaustion finally claimed them. Leila lay on the narrow cot by the window, Thunderbolt standing outside in the moonlit clearing, ears flicking at every distant sound. Sometime after midnight, the memories came. Shouts in a foreign language, the pop of gunfire, the taste of sand and blood. Leila jolted awake, heart pounding, gasping for air. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. The trauma was always waiting, lurking beneath the surface, a darkness she could never quite outrun. She stepped outside, into the cold night, hugging her arms around her. Thunderbolt stood alert in the moonlight, his breath a plume of silver mist. Leila walked to him, pressing her forehead to his. The old, familiar comfort of warm horsehair grounding her in the present. "I'm so tired, Thunderbolt," she whispered. "So tired of being afraid." The stallion nickered softly, nuzzling her shoulder, his presence steady and calming. For the first time in years, Leila allowed herself to break. Her body shook with silent sobs, grief and guilt spilling out in the darkness. Thunderbolt stood with her, unflinching, as if absorbing every tear, every tremor. When the storm passed, she wiped her face and looked up at the stars. "You saved me? I don't care what anyone says. You're not cursed. You're the only thing that's kept me going." As dawn colored the sky pink and gold, Leila sat on the cabin porch, Thunderbolt grazing quietly beside her. For the first time, she felt the possibility of peace, a fragile, flickering thing, but real. She realized that her uncle's legacy wasn't just the fight for justice. It was the stubborn, aching hope that broken things could be mended, that new bonds could form where old wounds refused to heal. Casey emerged with her phone, eyes shining. The feds are an hour out. They want us to meet them at the highway junction. We're almost there, Leila. Hold on a little longer." Leila nodded, her gaze sweeping over the horse, the cabin, the wild land her uncle had loved. She saddled Thunderbolt again, feeling his strength and calm. As she climbed onto his back, she realized something had changed. Thunderbolt wasn't just carrying her away from danger. He was carrying her forward, into whatever new life waited at the end of the trail. As they rode down the mountain, Leila let herself hope for the first time in years. Not just for justice, but for healing. And as the sun rose over the pines, she knew she wasn't running anymore. She was finally moving towards something better. The morning sun climbed slowly over the mountains as Leila, Casey, and Thunderbolt descended the winding road toward town. Every mile felt like crossing into enemy territory. Each bend in the trail brought new anxiety about what they might face in the open, about who might try to stop them before they could reveal the truth. Thunderbolt moved with quiet determination beneath Leila, his steps sure, ears alert. She drew strength from the steadiness of his gait, her heart pounding not with fear now, but with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. In case he drove ahead, her jeep dust-streaked and battered from the climb. When they reached the edge of town, Leila pulled Thunderbolt to a halt and waited while Casey spoke with the FBI agents, waiting in a plain sedan at the highway junction. Leila watched from the shadows, hand resting on Thunderbolt's neck, the horse's warm breath misting in the chill morning air. They had all the evidence now, the SD cards, the notebooks, photos, and Casey's own files, and they'd agreed that only a public confrontation could ensure the truth wouldn't be buried. By mid-morning, news had begun to circulate. The barn fire, the threats, the return of Leila Torres and her mysterious black stallion. Curious townspeople clustered in the square, drawn by whispers of scandal and by the spectacle of the big city reporters who arrived with cameras and notebooks. At the center of it all, in the old town hall, the mayor, Harlan Trent, held an emergency meeting to reassure the public about recent unfortunate events. The square was buzzing as Leila arrived, Thunderbolt at her side, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, the white lightning bolt on his forehead bright and unmistakable. Casey walked with her, carrying a folder thick with evidence. The FBI agents trailed at a safe distance, ready to intervene, but careful to let Leila take the lead. Leila's boots echoed on the courthouse steps. The mayor's eyes widened when he saw her, a flicker of panic quickly hidden behind a politician's smile. "Miss Torres," he called, raising his hands as if in welcome. "It's good to see you well after such a tragic accident." Leila's jaw tightened. She looked out at the crowd, faces she'd known all her life. Some sympathetic, some wary, some hungry for drama. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady and carrying across the square. "This wasn't an accident, Mayor. My uncle tried to warn people, and now I know why. You tried to steal this land. You tried to cover it up by destroying evidence, by threatening me, by endangering innocent animals and people. I have proof." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Casey handed copies of the evidence to the FBI agents, who began distributing them to the press. A reporter's camera flashed. The mayor's face reddened. "That's a serious accusation," Mayor Trent stammered, his eyes darting toward the sheriff, who shifted uneasily at his side. Casey stepped forward, voice sharp. "We have photographs, documents, testimony from those involved in the illegal animal transport, and proof of bribery and fraud. Yeah, we have the story. And now, so does the FBI." A hush fell as the lead FBI agent stepped onto the steps. "This is now a federal matter," she announced. "Mayor Trent, we'd like you to come with us." As the mayor sputtered and blustered, a figure emerged from the crowd. Frank Whitmore, heavy-set and weathered, his face drawn with guilt. For a moment, Leila felt a wave of anger. Frank had warned her, yes, but he'd also kept her uncle's secrets, turning a blind eye to the pain Thunderbolt had endured. Frank's voice broke through the silence. "I was wrong," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I was Sam's friend. I should have helped him, not looked away. I took a bribe once. It ate at me ever since. But Leila's right. The mayor and his friends did terrible things. I'll testify. I'll tell everything I know." There was an audible release of tension as the truth finally began to surface. The FBI moved quickly, handcuffing the mayor and two of his cronies. Sheriff Matthews tried to protest, but another agent turned to him. "We'll need you to answer a few questions as well, Sheriff." Leila exhaled, her knees trembling with relief and adrenaline. Thunderbolt pressed his head into her shoulder, steady and unafraid. For the first time, the town seemed to look at him, not with suspicion or fear, but with gratitude. As the crowd broke into scattered applause, a few children approached, wide-eyed to pet Thunderbolts. The stallion stood tall and calm, accepting their touch with the dignity of a warhorse who had finally come home. Reporters swarmed Casey, who gave them a brief summary, making sure to emphasize the heroism of Leila and the role Thunderbolt had played in exposing the crimes. One reporter called out to Leila, What's next for you and your horse? Leila smiled, exhaustion and hope mingling in her eyes. We're not going anywhere. This ranch, this land, is meant for healing, not for secrets. My uncle believed that. I believe it too. Frank approached, hat in hand, tears shining on his weathered cheeks. I'm sorry, Leila. I wish I'd done more. I'll help however I can to make things right. She nodded, accepting his apology, not because it erased the past, but because it helps shape a better future. You can start by helping rebuild, and by telling your story so no one ever forgets what happened here. As the mayor and his cronies were driven away in federal cars, Leila looked down at Thunderbolt, who stood proud, his wounds finally seen and his innocence restored. The weight of years of pain and silence seemed to lift, if only a little. The town square emptied, people dispersing in small, thoughtful groups. Leila and Casey lingered, watching the sun set over the hills. For the first time, Leila felt that the ranch, her uncle's dream, could become something more, a place of hope, and a home for the broken and the brave. Thunderbolt nickered softly, and Leila leaned her head against his neck, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Months slipped by, each day carrying with it the slow work of healing and rebuilding. Winter's grip loosened, and the Montana land thawed beneath a sky vast and blue. Where the old barn had stood, a new one was taking shape. Rising from the ashes, boards fresh and bright. The scars of fire and violence still marked the earth, but now green grass was beginning to push through, defiant and alive. Leila threw herself into the work, hands rough and strong from hours of carpentry and fence mending. She was not alone. The town, once wary and silent, had rallied in the wake of truth. Veterans from nearby counties showed up to help, some drawn by Casey's reporting, others by word of mouth. A place for healing, a sanctuary for those carrying burdens the world could not see. Frank Whitmore was among the first to arrive each morning, never shirking the hardest jobs. His regret transformed into steady, loyal action. Thunderbolt, too, was changed. He was still wary of strangers, but now he moved through the pasture with an easy confidence, his coat gleaming, the lightning-shaped blaze on his forehead a badge of survival. He'd become the beating heart of the ranch, a living testament to pain endured and trust regained. Where once he had shied away, now he approached children and veterans alike, gentle and patient. He seemed to sense when someone needed comfort, nuzzling trembling hands, standing quietly while tears fell onto his strong, warm shoulder. One bright morning, Leila stood by the paddock as a group of children arrived with their parents, some local, some from the VA hospital in Billings, others who had traveled hours just for a chance to see the famous horse. Thunderbolt greeted each with quiet dignity, lowering his great head for pats and whispered secrets. The children brushed his mane and giggled at the tickle of his breath, their laughter drifting through the new barn and out across the fields. Inside, the therapy center took shape. A humble space at first, but alive with the energy of new beginnings. Leila led riding lessons, teaching nervous children and wounded veterans alike how to trust their bodies, their voices, their feelings. She saw the same transformation in others that she'd found with Thunderbolt. Fear softening into hope, isolation melting away into community. The ranch became more than just a place to recover. It became a place to belong. Casey visited often, always with a notebook, sometimes with new volunteers or donors drawn by the stories she'd told the world. The therapy program grew, rescue animals arriving in waves, each with their own history of hardship. Leila found herself counseling not just veterans, but battered women, lost teenagers, and even town elders with no one else to talk to. There was a silent understanding between all who came. Here, pain was not something to hide, but something to heal through kindness and patience. One afternoon, as spring settled over the valley, Leila helped a shy girl named Sophie up onto Thunderbolt's broad back. The child clung tightly at first, but as Thunderbolt moved in a slow, steady circle, Sophie's grip loosened, her face blossoming into a tentative smile. Leila walked beside them, hand ready but not needed. When Sophie's father thanked her, voice choked with emotion, Leila simply nodded, words unnecessary. She understood what it meant to find a safe place at last. As the weeks passed, the ranch's rebirth drew more attention. Local reporters came to see the transformation, writing stories about resilience and community. Donations trickled in: feed, tack, money for medical bills. The mayor's crimes faded into history, but the lesson remained. Justice was only possible because someone had refused to look away. One warm afternoon, Leila walked the fields, Thunderbolt at her side. The ranch shimmered with life: children's voices, horses whickering, the scent of wild flowers and new hay. At the far end of the pasture, a mare whinnied in distress. Leila hurried over, heart pounding, and found the mare in labor. She called for help, and together with Frank and a volunteer vet, guided the mare through the birth. When it was over, a black foal stood unsteadily on spindly legs, the image of Thunderbolt, midnight dark, save for a small, white, lightning-shaped mark on his forehead. The sight stole Leila's breath. She knelt beside the foal, hands trembling with awe and gratitude. Thunderbolt nudged the new life, nostrils flaring, eyes soft. Leila laughed through happy tears, the foal wobbling toward her, already seeking connection. The news spread quickly. Thunderbolt had a foal, a symbol of renewal and hope. The ranch celebrated with a picnic, neighbors and friends gathering under the big sky, sharing food and stories, children running wild while adults remembered how to laugh. As dusk painted the sky with lavender and gold, Leila sat on the porch, journal open on her lap. She watched the foal nursing beside Thunderbolt, the two of them silhouetted against the last rays of sunlight. Her heart ached, but in a good way, a fullness she'd never known before. She wrote in her journal, the words flowing easily now. Some wounds don't heal. Some memories never fade. But I've learned that pain isn't a wall. It's a doorway. Through it, we find new strength, new hope, new family. This ranch was built from sorrow, but now it stands for healing. For Thunderbolt. For Uncle Sam. For everyone who ever felt broken or alone. She closed the journal and watched the stars come out, feeling the earth solid beneath her, the promise of tomorrow shimmering in the air. In the end, Leila understood the truth her uncle had tried to teach her. The strongest bonds are forged in hardship. Healing, like courage, grows in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it begins with a broken person and an even more broken animal, daring to trust each other and daring to begin again. Thunderbolt lifted his head and whinnied softly, as if agreeing. Leila smiled, tears drying on her cheeks, and whispered into the gathering night, "Thank you for everything." And beneath the wide Montana sky, the ranch, reborn, renewed, welcomed all who sought a place to heal.